realise what this political expansionism is and what it is not. Because crucially, it is not globalization. It is not signing a trade deal where you say that we have lower tariffs and our companies can establish and operate manufacturing plants in your country and you can have access to our markets. That is not what political expansionism is. That is trade. They have no reason to tell us why you have to control the government of a country and influence their elections in order for you to be able to sign a trade deal. The vast majority of the countries in the world have managed to sign trade deals and have free trade deals without this proposition. So I'm left confused why they say it is necessary specifically for China to do it, given the context of the economic powerhouse that China is and the benefits so many countries have from engaging with them, with their willingness to invest in infrastructure in other countries, why it has to be political. They didn't engage with the political reality. That is why they're going to be out of this debate. I'm going to talk about the impact first of what we think political expansionism causes, and then discuss that in the context of the Chinese people, because they say they want economic empowerment. I think you can get that from trade in the way that we would prefer China to operate, and we're going to talk specifically why the political nature of the way China is operating its expansionism is harming those individuals. What is the impact for the way in which China interacts with other countries because of political expansionism? First, oftentimes you have different forms of backlash against any sort of economic interaction with China when it comes attached with some sort of political association. These are twofold. Firstly, if it is overreaching, it can be seen in a flat-out rejection of willingness to engage or allow China to come in and establish manufacturing plant or infrastructure in your country because you are unwilling to accept the political control that they might have over you, etc. We think that these people are potential partners the Chinese people and Chinese companies could have benefited from if they didn't have these sort of political conditions tied to them. But I think the most common response that we are seeing to China's political expansion is the rest of the world saying it is China or it is us, because the ideology that this political expansionism pushes is often one that is just an antithesis to what Russia believes, to what the EU believes, about how states can control themselves. The sort of things they're pushing towards, like recognition of Taiwan, they're things that the UN and the EU and America do not align with. Therefore, they encourage countries to reject engagement with Russia, with China, because they think that all the political things that come along with it are bad. So that is why we see the rest of the world trying to gang up and encourage smaller countries to reject Chinese investment. See, for example, EU trying to encourage Serbia to reject Chinese investment because they don't like the idea of China gaining a political stronghold in their political territory. When you have non-political expansionism, you don't have it be China versus the rest of the world. So the EU are less likely to view China as a threat and more happy for them to establish economic bases in places like Serbia if they don't believe there's going to be that political element to it. Secondly, there is an unwillingness to strengthen China internally. Because, crucially, political expansionism uniquely sets up a situation where a stronger China could equal a weaker you as a country. Because a stronger China means they have more resources to support political people in your country who might seek to overthrow you in favor of a more pro-Chinese stance. No, thank you. Therefore, if you engage with China, they have more resources to do things that might be against your values. So a stronger China might equal less control within your country. That means you are less likely to want to do things that bolster the Chinese economy overall. I'm going to talk about how that limits the economic opportunities of individual Chinese people later, but before I go on, yeah.
Isn't a big issue with your case that China predominantly trades with smaller countries that have little to no political power or influence, so are coerced or pressured to deals that are bad for them, but extraordinarily good for China?
So that I think the fact of the matter is that China can only get so much out of interacting with those countries, and if they want to be a true economic powerhouse, and I'm going to talk about this later, to have a seat at the global table with things like the ICC, the UN, the World Trade Organization, that can only happen when China is not opposed but brought on board, and the idea of Chinese power is accepted by other global powers like the UN or like America or the EU have the power to stop China's political power from growing. So insofar as political power also helps those individuals, we think this sort of coerced way of trying to gain political power actually means that there is more opposition to China having any sort of official power, which helps them engage on a broader basis, like on things like global organizations like the UN or the WTO. That is why if you want to talk about not having a cap on how far China can grow with respect to its ability to engage economically or diplomatically with countries, this sort of political expansionism is one that is likely to be rejected by the real powers like America, like we're seeing the rhetoric come out of America with respect to, and that's another impact of it, that the rhetoric rejecting and encouraging countries to reject engagement with China. So, on to the interests of the Chinese people, because I think an awful lot of the stuff that they're talking to us about, maybe if they weren't really are charitable and they say we do need political control over these countries because we need them to, say, support us in the South China Sea and our claims there. I'm unsure the link between those sort of soft power political land grabs and power in that way and the link between helping individual Chinese people. Insofar as we have shown you that a political association with this expansionism is likely to lead to the maximum interaction being lowered with respect to the rest of the world, that helps the Chinese people less in 3 ways. No, thank you. Firstly, there's fewer economic opportunities at home. If countries see it as a danger to invest in you because China gets stronger, they could potentially get weaker, or China could have more control over them. Your economic opportunities are broad or limited if countries are likely to reject a deal with you because they think it threatens their political security. But thirdly, and really importantly, one of the only checks on Chinese power and of ensuring the interests of Chinese people comes from people who exist outside of China because they don't exist within the weird credit system or the Chinese like police or force that actually be used against them. When you have institutions, universities that exist outside of China that are bought up and in the hands of the Chinese government, it is harder for Chinese students within those institutions to have actual political power by saying things like organizing a boycott in their university or having their university publicly criticize China if they are doing things that are contrary to the interests of the Chinese people. Insofar as the Chinese diaspora are an incredibly important check on the power of China for protecting the Chinese people, even if they prove to you that China is currently serving the interests of those people, if you shut down dissent outside of China, it is harder to ensure that you have that check and the likelihood of fulfillment of those interests in the future. Proud to oppose.
To the Chinese people, dealing with people living in China, and the diaspora, talking about those harms that are accrued. First thing to talk about political expansion. OG say that it is necessary to control governments to do 2 things. First of all, to make it easier to make trade deals, and second of all, to have more sway in places like the UN. Let's just answer this first point, right? If China is engaging in political expansionism, that means they have already secured the trade deal. They have already made that link. So it is not necessary to have political expansionism to make trade deals at the point where political expansionism can't exist without a trade deal. You need to promise the investment, you need to promise the trade, you need to promise the partnership in order for political expansionism to exist in the first place. So that's the first response to that. The second response to that is genuinely, I don't understand why South Africa turns down $4 billion of investment in exchange for particular trade deals or one-off contracts with China on their side of the house. That is genuinely so on our side of the house. That's so unclear to me. Insofar as that happens at the moment, they never explained why the political element was necessary for them to turn down trade deals. The nature and picture of Chinese deals and investment as they happen at the moment are so good to the particular countries they're investing in, they actually couldn't be turned down, and that's the particular issue. And that the problem is where the limit of that is and what happens there. So to be perfectly honest, they already have a degree of control, and they fail to explain to you why the specific capacity of literally electing the people who go into government positions is the thing that is necessary to make governments allow for you to cobalt mine, or allow for you to invest in railway infrastructure, or allow for you to build a port in Djibouti. They never explain to you why that doesn't happen on their side of the house. We say that insofar as those countries want to develop, it just exists that those countries have an interest in entering those deals in the first place. It is not necessary to exert political expansionism in order to have trade expansion. Right, no. So the status example, is we see things like Saudi Arabia's involvement in Pakistan, like threatening to revoke deals that connect a port to a port, threatening to revoke trade deals with Pakistan because of Chinese investment. We see things like US involvement in the Bangladeshi elections and Bangladeshi foreign policy because they don't want them to cooperate with China. That is the status quo where you're seeing interventionism. That wasn't responded to by the opening government when Aishling tells you that you're specifically creating almost a Cold War effect where people are racing to grab control of countries and stopping both the developing countries from having more options, but also China from having more trade options in more of these countries. But the SCG's case is true, and that small countries are being exploited. The comparative is that either, on our side of the house, some of those small countries will be like snapped up by other forces that don't want China to have control of those countries, whereas on their side of the house, whereas on our side of the house, China can just trade with all of those small countries. Like, in a world where there is no political expansionism, where there's more trade deals, they can trade with more of those small countries, and that is preferable insofar as they explain to us. The point of this is that China has more trade. Their benefits all rely on increased trade because they're all economic benefits, and insofar as they did not explain to you that you need to have government control to have those economic benefits, they fall out of this debate. So to be clear, no, this isn't about mandating trade deals, because this is about specifically getting involved in electoral policy. This is about specifically saying you shouldn't recognise Taiwan at the UN. This is about specific political policy that has no direct tie to how much you can mine cobalt, that has no direct tie to how much exports you can send out of your country, and that has no direct tie to how much China can give you in loans in order to develop your infrastructure and allow Chinese citizens to come in and work in your countries and work in those jobs. Those things are not connected to any of the political aims of China, or at least they failed to prove that they were. No, let's talk about, though, international policy, right? Because they tell you that international organisations don't matter like the WTO. Insofar as the WTO are doing things like criticising trade practices, and the UN is creating a forum where there's so much conflict over Taiwan and Hong Kong and things like that, those things are undermining China's authority, both in their region and internationally. Right? Stop saying yes, come on, have a bit of respect. So what should China want? We think the reality of what China should want is more investment in projects like the Asian Infrastructural Bank, where you have cooperation across the political spectrum, so Australia's involved, Britain's involved, but there is no political expansionism. The problem that China has is that all of the institutions that are in the world, like the UN, WTO, etc., they were all created after World War II, and so the methods still exist, right? Even though China is one of the biggest global hegemons, they don't have the same amount of voting power as European countries or the US. And that means that China significantly has a decreased voice on international issues and a decreased power in terms of getting involved in resolution of international issues, but also there is increased criticism of China that is uncharitable and they can't respond to in the likes of the UN. So why is it important that we do things like create new processes like the Asian Infrastructural Bank that allow for China to cooperate with more countries as opposed to diametrically oppose them to world superpowers as they exist? One, because that actually does secure the potential for global domination. If China wants to be the biggest world's superpower, then China needs to overtake other institutions. Insofar as the WTO could hold them back through the guise of America or Europe, or insofar as other international institutions can criticize them, that isn't as effective on their side of the house. Second of all, it means that there's actual potential for widespread global growth. They say they only want small countries. That's not true. They can only have small countries in their side of the house because all the other countries are in control by other big powers in a particular region, so whether that be Saudi, whether that be the EU, whether that be the US. So they can't have them. That's the problem. But also, there's literally no guarantee that these countries that they have in the pockets at the moment won't default on their loans. Who's to say that the 12 billion they gave to Rwanda the other day will come back into their pockets? Genuinely, if China wants to progress and become a global domination, they need to create institutions in which they're powerful. That will never happen insofar as countries' foreign policies, big countries' foreign policies, are to block China out of other countries and see them as an enemy. There will never be cooperation. Yeah, closing up.
The issue with that is that these institutions have votes for 200 countries. China's one country. The only way to get votes in your favour is to make all the small countries vote in your favour.
Okay. But you allow for things like vetoes and speaking power, and where votes are weighted, those votes more disproportionately go towards people like the US and Europe. So it doesn't matter if you can get all these tiny countries on board, because they're generally not recognised, often have observer status or a minor amount of votes, and can exert a minimum amount of power. But even like, see that the big boy tables only belong to the people who are the big boys, right? And China doesn't get the same amount of votes proportional to what it is. If it wants proper development, it needs that. But let's talk about harnessing the Chinese people, right? Because not only do you have a limit on economic institutions as far as people like Pakistan reject deals, but also you have companies who are coming to China being more cynical. And finally, you limit the capacity for both external people to critique like Chinese human rights policies insofar as the institutions are in the pockets of the Chinese government, which would allow for more discussion and dialogue that would protect the Chinese people, and also also for the diaspora, not only to critique the Chinese government, but also to be protected, because Chinese forces have feet in the ground in the countries they are now living on, and therefore they are more accountable to Chinese law, which is bad for their quality of life. Look, for the sake of protection, and for the sake of economic development, and for the sake of long-term development, please oppose this motion.
Yeah, please lined up.
Just like USA first fails the USA, a China first policy fails China. On closing opposition, we're going to be the first team to accurately characterize what these deals look like and explain why economic stability is far more important than vague political influence that CG talks about. So firstly, what do these deals look like? It's not tariff reduction. Newsflash is called the Belt and Road Initiative. It is a $1 trillion measure where they invested in things like Pakistan. They gave a $250 billion loan to build a fixed site infrastructure projects. So not just tariff reduction, these are major investments in major countries. So then there's the challenge from CG about why the CCP is going to do this poorly. The reason why they're going to do it poorly is the principal agent problem. There is no body called the unified CCP. There are individual agents within the CCP who have different kind of incentives, all of which when collectivized are unlikely to do it well. Who are these two agents who are most important? Number one are state-owned enterprise administrators who are actually the ones constructing the projects. They have a bad incentive because they were evaluated on 3-year terms, have a massive incentive not to piss off the CCP and to get promoted internally within the CCP. This is why when a CCP agent tells them you should invest in X, it doesn't matter whether the loan is going to be non-performing in the future, because their immediate incentive is to make it to the next mark and make sure they're not going to be fired or sent to the equivalent of a gulag. Secondly, there are rising Communist Party officials who want a legacy project. Given how tight the competition is to rise within the very stratified structure of the Chinese Communist Party, there's a strong incentive to take high risks on high-profile projects, because if they're risk-averse, there's no way to differentiate themselves from the 200 other people who want a promotion. This is why it's very unlikely that the CCP is going to do it well, because you have ambitious members in the CCP who are investing in legacy projects that are really prominent, like the Habantocha port in Eastern Sri Lanka, but it massively failed. CG says, well, it doesn't matter if they fail, China can seize the asset like the Habantocha port in Sri Lanka. One, why does having a massive port that has literally no ships to Sri Lanka benefit the Chinese people? I can see how it benefits the military, does not see how it benefits people. Second, this is literally the Lincoln backlash. Looking at the seizure of the Cambodian ports is how Mahathir Mohamad won the election in Malaysia, promising, saying, we don't want this to happen to us. This is literally linked to all of Odo's arguments. So, on our extension, we think that these predatory deals that CG talks about is not just bad for the countries that accept them, it's terrible for China. 3 legs on this. Firstly, this creates a massive debt problem. To finance the $1 trillion that they are spending on the Belt and Road Initiative, also called the New Silk Road, they have to make sure that their banks are directed by the CCP to issue loans to other countries, like the $250 billion they gave to Pakistan and the China-Pakistan economic corridor that runs all the way down to the port. The reason is that the reason the market did not provide $250 billion in bonds to Pakistan is because it's not likely to succeed. Odo says, well, what if Rwanda doesn't pay it back? This we are giving the warrant. That is, the reason why a government is providing it and not the market is literally it is unlikely to be a successful loan. What about the context here? In the status quo, China is trying to deleverage their state-owned enterprises and banks. The warrant, that is, deleveraging means reducing the amount of debt they have on their balance sheet. This is because in 2008, to make sure that they didn't go through a recession, they directed their state-owned enterprises and banks to massively increase the size of their balance sheet, take out enormous amounts of loans that currently they're trying to reduce the risk on the financial system. By massively continuing to expand the balance sheets in terms of global expansion, they are further threatening the enormous collapse of the financial system. Secondly, this undermines the transition to a consumption-based economy. To finance the $1 trillion that they're giving in massive investment deals abroad, they need to encourage Chinese consumers to save money. That is, take the money they're earning, put their money in a Chinese banks, and then they direct the banks to lend that money out to third-party countries. This makes sure that China continues to do policies that encourage savings, such as favorable tax rates on savings vis-a-vis spending. The problem is that you need a consumption-based economy, not a savings investment-based economy. This is the reason for this, is that China no longer has a comparative advantage in low-level labor such that it is necessary for export-led growth. This answers the argument that CG provides about China needing demand for their goods. Because trying to force countries like Bangladesh to buy their goods is incredibly short-sighted, because they cannot sustain this forever. As Chinese wages continue to rise, their ability to have an export-based model is very low. What they need is a service-based model like you see in Europe and you see in the United States, where domestic demand that is not saving, that is spending, funding is far more likely to sustain it. There are large elements within the Chinese Communist Party who want to do this transition, but as long as they're engaging in political expansionism, they need to direct Chinese consumers to save so that the banks have money to lend out to third-party countries. This is undermining the most important thing China needs to do to sustain their growth. OG, you have any questions?
The upshot of the One Belt One Road initiative was, as we told you, access to markets, resources, and influence they didn't previously have. At the point at which this is successful, do you consider this is beneficial to the Chinese?
Nope, totally reject that as beneficial to Chinese. One, access to goods, sure, they could sell a few more things. They're selling exactly the same things talked about. Really low-end manufactured goods that China is literally not going to be producing in 10 years. Secondly, we think the enormous backlash as countries continue to pull out of the Belt and Road Initiative, like Malaysia literally did last year with Mahathir Mohamad, totally undermines those things. Thirdly, if the financial system of China goes under, I don't care because of the result of the increase in debt or the fact that their economy is dramatically more sclerotic. I don't care that they have greater access to goods, if the fundamentals of Chinese economy is bad. There are tons of libertarian countries around the world with tons of access to other countries' goods, but if the fundamentals of the economy remain dramatically worse, this outweighs access to goods. Okay, third warrant, this undermines reforms of the state-owned enterprise system writ large and increases the inefficiency of the Chinese economy. This is true for three reasons. Firstly, the way they do this with the state-owned enterprises, they use the massive overproduction of aluminum, steel, and cement created by the quotas of the state-owned enterprise, and they redirect those resources to construct the literal massive highways that they're building in Pakistan. If they literally did not have this, and they didn't have an avenue by which they could funnel the surplus production that is artificially demanded by the CCP and not what the market does, they'd be forced to redirect these resources where it's going most. They're putting tons of money into, say, cement production, but this is not where China has this comparative advantage. But secondly, the informational advantages and various other advantages that China gives SOEs in the name of political expansion, such as access to African contracts, which OG identifies, or the information from IP theft that they do continue in the United States, they give them to the SOEs. Newsflash panel, what is in the interest of the SOEs or the CCP is not in the interest of the people. The money that goes to the SOEs goes to the rich people in the SOE, they get remitted back in bribes to the CCP. The average person does not see the benefits of the fact that this African contract that OG talks about, because they're not actually working in Africa, they demand that the money that they get is not spent in China. Most importantly, the massive comparative advantage that the CCP is giving to the SOEs crowds out the creation of a vibrant private sector in China, because now the CCP, in the name of political expansion, is giving tons of good contracts to the SOEs, they're giving tons of good information to the SOEs, they're literally advertising globally on behalf of the SOEs. This makes it really, really hard for a private firm to emerge in China to compete with them. Moreover, this not only increases the risk of financial collapse to concentrate more power in the power of the SOEs, but the capacity to handle collapse dramatically declines as China, as a result of its massive spending abroad, is no longer has the fiscal wiggle room because they've directed so much money away. What is the weighing here? People in China have no safety net. They have no safe form of social security. This means financial volatility through massive things like increasing the debt load, the inefficiency in Chinese fundamentals, risks totally wiping out progress. What causes political crackdowns that OG identifies is not just slower growth, but it is acute collapses in the short term that make people riot. It's not just over long-term worrying wars, it is the fact that there are acute risks of financial collapse. This is far more important because this is what actually results in a political crackdown. This also, incidentally, outweighs their own perception, because if this results in, say, the collapse of the Chinese SOE system, this is going to make China look particularly worse, and outweighs OO, because why does it matter whether, say, other countries vote the same way on Taiwan? What does matter is Chinese consumers' pocketbooks, and this is the link Charlie and I specifically give you. The deals they're signing are, because of misaligned incentives, are terrible for China. Super proud to be on CF.